I want to talk about hypothecated taxes. If you live in Britain, you pay taxes, quite a few in fact, but perhaps the greatest trick of successive governments that they have pulled is the illusion that certain taxes are for something and that there's a neat and traceable link between what you pay and what you get. And in reality, the UK Treasury guards its flexibility with the fervour of a Victorian butler guarding the wine cellar. Earmarked or hypothecated taxes sound attractive, but they're mostly fiction. So let's look at this mirage and how the trees of fantasy have surrounded the crystal waters of our money. The BBC licence fee is probably the only clear-cut example of a genuine hypothecated tax. It's technically not even a tax, but a compulsory charge, justified by its sole purpose of funding the BBC. And even that has been politically manipulated. The government forced the BBC to pay for free licences for the over 75s, a social policy dressed up as an editorial act of generosity. Other so-called purpose-built taxes, well, they tend to vanish into the Treasury's black hole. Consider national insurance. It was designed, at least politically packaged, as a fund for the NHS and pensions. But while the money enters a national insurance fund, the government regularly raids or tops it up. It's a pot, not a promise. Or the short-lived health and social care levy, badged by Boris Johnson as a post-COVID funding stream. The levy died before it really lived. Introduced in 2021, scrapped in 2022. It was earmarked, then unring-fenced, then discarded. Let me offer a few other examples of taxes introduced with bold intentions that dissolved under scrutiny. The fuel duty escalator, supposedly in 1993, supposedly an environmental measure. Instead, it became an annual price hike with no visible return in green infrastructure. The 2000 fuel protest killed it off. The air passenger duty, and this one is interesting, also framed as a green tax, internalising the cost of flying, but the money goes nowhere near environmental projects. The stamp duty surcharge on second homes, the 3% add-on, was pitched as helping first-time buyers. The housing crisis has only worsened. Apprenticeship levies, introduced to fund workplace training. In practice, employers found it unusable and funds expired, quietly redirected to the exchequer. Soft drinks levy in 2018, one of the rare successes, not because of hypothecation, but because it changed behaviour. Manufacturers reformulated. Sugar consumption fell. It worked because the structure encouraged reform, not because the funds were protected. In fact, the proceeds were meant to go to school sports, but were quietly absorbed into general spending. The VAT on private schools meant to go towards funding a new bevy of teachers. Not so. In fact, the number of teachers who are being trained has gone down. These examples illustrate a pattern. The more loudly a government proclaims a tax has a purpose, the more likely it is that the purpose is political cover, not fiscal architecture. And that's why Labour's most politically resonant tax charge and tax change, the VAT on private school fees, is a deceit. It sounds targeted, it sounds purposeful, it sounds morally urgent, a redistributive move to help fund state education. But again, where does the money really go? Not to specific schools, not to local authorities. It enters Treasury coffers and is counted towards the general educational budget, which could include anything from repairing roofs to patching teacher pension deficits. Meanwhile, councils are spending millions on taxes for pupils because of a shortage of local school places. If this tax were truly about improving access, wouldn't we see direct investment in places where families are being displaced from their schools? We won't, because the tax isn't structurally tied to a strategic stated goal. So what's the real issue here? It's not taxation per se, it's the disingenuous marketing of taxation as a targeted social engineering. It's the illusion of moral purpose, when the real motive is often revenue neutrality, deficit control, or simply political optics. Treasury orthodoxy hates ring fencing because it limits flexibility. Hypothecated taxes are unstable, politically risky to maintain, and easy to revoke. That's why even well-intentioned levies get co-opted, diluted, or discarded, and it's why we should be sceptical of every new tax presented as a moral crusade, because in British politics, the destination of tax revenue is almost always the same. The general fund, not the promised cause. The truth is this: until structural reform forces real transparency in how taxes are spent, we will keep mistaking revenue collection for justice and mistaking sound bites for strategy. So next time you're told a tax will fund a hospital, a school, or even a planet, pause. Ask not what your tax can do for your country. Ask what your treasury will do with your tax.